The first large-scale airborne operation was performed in conjunction with the assault on Sicily, 10 July 1943. Taking off from fields in Africa for dropping zones in Sicily, troop carrier units transported by glider and aircraft, units of the 1st British and the U.S. 82nd Airborne Divisions. Almost a year before this operation, a troop carrier group transported a parachute infantry battalion from England to start the invasion of North Africa. But the invasion of Sicily was the first real test for troop carrier units, which had trained in maneuvers in Texas, the Carolinas, and England. The Sicilian operation indicated there was much to be learned about the planning of an airborne operation. Troop carrier aircraft were shot down by friendly forces, and parachute drops were widely scattered. It was a tactical success, however, rich in experience for the units which would later participate in the assault on the continent. The Griswold nose was developed to protect the glider in rough landings. The parachute arrestor was adopted to permit landing the glider in restricted areas. The intercom between tow plane and glider was introduced. Blitz landings were out. Glider pilots were taught a slow, constant rate of descent, with a slow landing to a precise spot on the ground. Many types of combat aircraft were suitable for towing the CG-4A glider. B-25 was used. P-38 performed its task well. Even the PBY became a tow plane. Note the takeoff of the PBY before the glider. Here's a B-17 in dual tow. And a triple tow by a C-54. Airborne aviation engineers trained in anticipation of their probable use for building landing strips and rebuilding bombed aerodromes in France. Troop carrier airplanes are converted in a matter of minutes into ambulance ships.
Airborne and troop carrier units are theater of operation forces. Their employment must be an integral part of the basic plan made by the agency directing all land, sea, and air forces in the operation. The coordinating directive must be issued in time to allow realistic preparation and training by troop carrier and airborne units for the specific operation. Airborne troops must be employed in mass, and the bulk of the force landed in as small an area as possible. The use of highly trained pathfinder teams dropped in advance to mark dropping zones and glider landing zones is essential. Procedures must be prescribed which will ensure that troop carrier aircraft on course at proper altitudes and on correct time schedules are not fired upon by friendly forces.
power pilots and the staffs of operational training groups, which were committed to the United Kingdom, were trained in flying procedures of the United Kingdom before they left the States. Flying was emphasized, designed to prevent early detection by the enemy. Air crews had to fly through a corridor of flak, pinpointed by searchlights. Every aspect of operations in the United Kingdom, flying control, air-sea rescue, supply, British navigation, weather, all phases of theater training were covered before the units departed overseas. Maneuvers ended with gliders landing in small fields, similar to the potential landing zones in France. Live loads are in the gliders. Airborne troops continue in their specialized tactics. Glider pilots are trained to stay in action with them until evacuated. Greatest airborne effort in history in the making, a steady stream of gliders flowed into England for the coming assault. From the crates in which they were shipped, Shantytown emerged. Troop carrier glider mechanics and Air Service Command units have the task of rapid assembly of CG-4As. In addition to their normal assignment of 100 CG-4As, some groups had to maintain 140 horses, with the usual complement of glider mechanics. British ground crews helped assemble their own Horsa gliders before turning them over to troop carrier. This British Horsa now belongs to the 9th Troop Carrier Command. Operational training with the Airborne Division started in March, 3 months before the assault. This time, Troop Carrier did not have to haul freight. It could concentrate on its combat assignment and train for it. Intensive work was done on column takeoffs and landings and night formation flying. Each group now had 73 aircraft instead of the normal 52. The troop carrier force of 3 wings and 14 groups contained 1 experienced wing and 5 combat-wise groups from the Mediterranean. The last 7 of the 9 troop carrier groups committed from the States arrived in England between January and March. This system is used to recover gliders from small fields. Three planes in each squadron are equipped for aerial pickup. Thorough coordination between ground and air is necessary for accuracy in delivery of resupply containers. From March through May, 35 lower echelon and 3 full-scale command exercises were held, culminating in a full dress rehearsal for the operation against the continent. The times, loads, distances, and navigational aids were exactly as would be used in the assault. Landing zones were selected for their similarity to those in Normandy, which intelligence showed were 900 to 1,500 feet long and averaged 500 feet wide. Mosaics showed that the objective areas would hold 1,300 gliders. The Normandy fields were bounded by trees 15 to 75 feet high, along with numerous dense hedges. Glider pilots were allowed to choose their own fields, and release was made at heights from 800 to 1,000 feet. Both ideas were impractical. The high release made the gliders more vulnerable to ground fire and sacrificed accuracy. And when each pilot chose his landing field, there were too many conflicting patterns. Following this maneuver, it was decided that leaders were to choose the landing field for the 3 other gliders in his element, and the release would be made at 400 to 600 feet. Overnight, the ships blossomed out in their new war paint. On D-2, invasion markings were applied. Another lesson from Sicily. D-Day-1. Time narrows down. Gliders for the first night's operation are assembled for the takeoff, ready to follow the parachute serials to France. A parking diagram showing the location of each aircraft has been given the airborne troops. Each pilot has been furnished a list of his passengers. These are the first ships to take off in the airborne invasion of Fortress Europe. first Pathfinder ship is airborne at 21:54. Marauders went in ahead of the troops to blast enemy coastal installations. Priority number 1, air supremacy, had been obtained a long time before D-Day. The 8th and 9th Air Forces had accomplished that. The Marauders go on to the next phase, the bombing and crippling of roads, bridges, waterways, railheads, the isolation of a battlefield. And the battlefield is isolated. No German reserves come through to the coast in any strength. The beachhead holds and grows as the Air Force piles up a record number of sorties. Fighters blast every target that moves on enemy ground. Any target of opportunity is legitimate prey. Record sorties are flown by the fighters on D-Day. Back in England, the next glider serials are being marshaled for the takeoff. The C-47s are doing double duty. Back from the paratroop drops, they're ready to take off with gliders. Dual tow had been practiced in the States, but it was not used in this operation due to the extra time necessary for air assembly and to the additional marshalling space which it would require on the aerodromes. The coordinated British effort was made simultaneously by the British 6th Airborne Division, transported by RAF 38 Group on objectives around Caen. Particularly interesting was the delivery of 8.5-ton tanks of a Recce regiment in 30 huge Hamilcar gliders. 29 of the 30 tanks were in action within 10 minutes after they were landed. Air superiority makes possible this daylight operation. areas flooded by the Germans. Parachutes and gliders from the previous serials. The gliders cut loose from their tow planes. We have fighter cover all the way to the landing zone. Not even a lone German fighter was able to sneak through. One of the gliders makes a landing in the flooded area. Here are the staked fields intelligence warned us about. The traps consisted of poles 12 to 15 feet long. One of the tow planes crashed and burned, but actually the C-47 suffered few losses. Some of the glider landings were rugged, and so were some of the paratroop landings. Resupply ships took off simultaneously with the last glider serial from 5 airfields which were designated as takeoff fields for resupply by air. All resupply was directed by the Allied Expeditionary Air Force Headquarters through an agency called CATOR, Combined Air Transport Operations Room. Packing, delivery, loading, and lashing of all supplies for aerial delivery was the job of the Service Command. Requests for air resupply were approved by the Army Group or Air Force in the field. Supplies are dropped. Even before the landing mats are laid, a resupply glider comes in with more equipment. Materiel brought in those first days by troop carrier made the difference between a continued assault to Carentan, utilizing the elements of surprise and enemy disorganization, or a stalled offensive, helplessly waiting for supplies bogged down by weather. The landing strip at Saint-Mare handled the traffic for resupply. Jeeps and trucks are lined up at the field, waiting to rush the supplies to the front. Gliders used on the first day's operation and those used in resupply are towed back to England. Inaccessible spots, tow planes use an aerial pickup to get the gliders back home. Others, not flyable, will be disassembled and hauled back by boat. This is part of the price paid for 6 and 7, June 1944. 1,662 troop carrier airplanes were dispatched in the first 24 hours of the assault. 43 were lost and 311 damaged by small arms fire. A lot happened here that cameras could never get. But a corporal with the Pathfinders remembers.
We were covering the landing of the first bunch of gliders. We were pinned down by German fire across the field. As the men came running out, they stepped right into it and started to drop all around us. The German cannon blew one glider right apart.
A veteran glider pilot.
A night glider operation means more landing casualties and extreme difficulty in unloading. It is certainly not desirable if a dawn or dusk landing is at all practicable.
A power pilot.
I flew in a parachute serial the first night and the navigation aids really worked. But I couldn't see the light T, which was supposed to be on my drop zone. BUPS was used very little because Rebecca and G worked so well. 717 was used to check landfall and general position, but that's about all.
A War Department observer who entered combat with one of the airborne divisions.
Troops were dropped generally in the vicinity of the DZs, but were badly scattered. It appears that prearranged supply systems are not flexible enough for airborne combat. Supplies should be dropped as called for by local commanders rather than dropped in mass. Large-scale parachute resupply drops are wasteful and should be restricted to emergencies. More attention should be paid to switching over to ground supply as soon as possible.
A troop carrier liaison officer.
Our Pathfinder teams, in 2 cases I know of, suffered heavy casualties. Eureka was installed in every case, at times with the Pathfinders flat on their stomachs, pinned down by enemy crossfire. The light Ts, which we expected so much help from, were only 10% operational, due to enemy fire. 50% of the resupply drop landed in enemy hands. Communications didn't exist to advise later serials of changes in the enemy situation. Troop carrier operations and communications personnel should move with the first parachute or glider units. 89% of the horses and 50% of the Wacos crashed in landing. But 75% of personnel and equipment were ready for combat.
Back from Normandy, these men would have faced further tests. How much they had learned will be history. History made by an airborne army.